a picture of the Empire Builder coming out of Glacier Park.
Yeah, it's a SDP 40 or 45. I can't tell which one it is. Probably a 45.
Got a lot of people commented they really like our discussion and your questions. They said that adds a lot. So please ask questions.
Gosh.
Well, here's the first E-units. These were purchased right after the war. It's an E7. They're 2,000 horsepower. They have two 1,000 horsepower, 567 cubic inch diesels, and they have four motors, two here and two there. So it's 60,000 pounds of tractive effort for each locomotive. And this would pull the Empire Builder, but they found it really wasn't quite enough. And by the way, this is the only time you're going to see a billy goat facing east. Normally they face west.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And so, told you that.
Yeah.
Interesting point.
And if you can see down here, that one's facing west, facing to the left anyway, which is west. But so here's the builder, the first builder in 1947, and they had two of these locomotives on there, and they would run, but they started to get heavier. And so here it's running along the south end of Glacier National Park. And so finally they had to, they bought F3s and F7s. So this is an F3 and that's an F7, F3, F7. They're all 1,500 horsepower. So instead of 4,000 horse, now they had 6,000 horsepower. And instead of 120,000 pounds of tractive effort, they doubled that. Now they have 240,000 pounds. They have four units with 60,000 pounds of tractive effort each. And it's because the most of the cars have pulleys for the generator and for the air conditioning. They have steam heat, but in the summertime they have pulleys that run the air conditioners. So the engines have to provide all that additional horsepower to cool the train. And so they well, here we are at this is at King Street in Seattle, and you see the electric bus and everything, but here they are with the F units on the various trains. And here's a freight train coming through with F units, and this is probably the International, which goes to Vancouver at King Street. And then they also ran a train. These are FTs. They're the original 1,350 horse. This train is the Columbian, I believe it's called, that goes from Seattle to Spokane. But here's the builder coming through. They're waving to track workers in Glacier National Park. And here it is out in Montana. This must be in Washington someplace, probably in Spokane. And here's the builder, and they originally they painted the truck silver, but like the Santa Fe, they found that's really difficult to so this builder would be coming, this would be coming north out of Seattle, and then it goes to Everett, and then it heads east.
Okay.
And so here are the builders, eastbound, westbound builders are meeting in Washington someplace. And here it is in Glacier Park. It is a beautiful, beautiful mountains. And then during the fall and winter, they would run three F7s. And here's the original FTs. These are 1,350 horse. They bought these before World War II. And so this obviously a publicity train with new either boxcars or reefers or something. But these are 1,350 horse, and they had a lot of mechanical equipment on them. The fans were run by pulleys and everything. Well, later General Motors changed everything to electrical. It was much easier to control and less maintenance and less work for the firemen. So they took some of these engines and then sent them back to General Motors, and they made GP units out of them. They called them GP5s. I think I got a picture of one someplace here. Obviously, publicity shot. Guy in waders watching the train.
Casually looking at the photographer.
Yeah. So here's the builder coming out of Glacier National Park.
That car in the foreground, way over to the right, CB&Q.
Yeah. The Burlington owned some percentage of the equipment because the train ran from Seattle to St. Paul on the Great Northern, but then it also ran to Chicago. It continued on to Chicago. So the Burlington actually owned some equipment. Yeah, that was a good catch.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, this says Great Northern, and that's CB&Q.
And this does not seem like a publicity shot because the tree in front of the CB&Q car seems kind of out of place.
Yeah.
If that were for the calendar, they would have cut it down.
That's right.
Away.
Or some of the rail fans, they mow the grass and
Yeah.
Yeah, here's another one, CB&Q.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think these were the like slumber coaches.
Are those the sleepers that had double level?
Yeah. Well, they
Over, under?
were kind of shoehorned in here. There was this sleeper has this space here, and this sleeper has this space down here. And so they were sort of stacked, and that way they could get a lot more in. I remember
Yeah, your legs were underneath somebody else.
Yeah, or over
the
them.
one time this was so many years ago, it was before any of Amtrak's new equipment, but I rode the Broadway Limited to New York to see my brother, and I had a ticket for a slumber coach, and it was at the head of the train, and Amtrak did a smart thing in putting the slumber coaches ahead of the coaches since the aisle was so narrow. But I think that it was actually a duplex roomette I was in because they were stacked so that part of the room had a chunk carved out of it that belonged to the people above me or person.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as tiny as I picture a slumber coach would be. But I was never in a slumber coach, so I could be wrong too.
It
was before I
go ahead.
It was before I would have known to do things like just take note of the name of the car.
Yeah.
and I could have looked it up.
Yeah. But it it was a good way to pack more and get more economical, especially for single people.
Yeah.
Getting a whole roomette or a or a room would be a lot more expensive. So okay, then I'm gonna go over this a little bit. This is Minneapolis Station.
Yeah.
Obviously in the mid 60s, because they're building the towers apartments. There's the crane. And the Great Northern tested the GP35 and the U25B because General Motors and General Electric were both offering high horsepower locomotives for passenger service because they didn't know Amtrak was coming. They figure, well, we're going to be continuing to run passenger trains, and so they wanted to get more efficient engines and higher horsepower. It means you could run fewer of them. And the Santa Fe actually did buy and I think National de Mexico also bought the General Electric U28CG, which means C for 6 axles and G for steam generator. So they had steam generators.
When I was in Mexico, my train was behind a U36CG.
Okay, they bought more of them.
Big time.
Yeah, they liked the General Electrics. They really did.
Yeah.
So they were obviously they were testing these in the mid 60s, and obviously General Motors won because in 66 they bought the SDP40, and this is the original one. I took this in 68 down at the St. Paul Union Depot, and it's an SD40, the original one, not a -2, and it has a steam generator back here, so you can see it. And so this would be for the Western Star, something like that, because this is 3,000 horse and that's 1,500 horse. So but it's a standard SD40, but geared fast. And this unit actually still exists. It's running over at during the summer, it runs over at Osceola. It's still the 325 and it's painted Burlington Northern, but it's still running around. And here's the 325, and I think it's Spokane. It looks like Spokane, pulling maybe one of the Columbian or something like that. And here's the 322 and a pair of them coming back on the Empire Builder. I think that's Spokane as well. And then they went to the blue, and I remember that was a big deal because I used to watch the KSTP news at 10 o'clock with Bob Bryan and Bill. Can't remember his name. Anyway, they had two guys. Bob Bryan was the lead, and they had a story about the Great Northern, revamping, and of course they did because the Great Northern was a sponsor of the news, and then they had a commercial and everything. But they talked about going to this blue, and I remember looking at that and I going, "Wow, where did that come from?" And Great Northern, they were working on the merger, and this was Great Northern's proposal for the Burlington Northern paint scheme.
Ah, okay.
And then the Burlington had come up with Cascade Green and the hockey stick paint scheme,
Yeah.
and that actually sort of a modification of that ended up winning out because the blue looks pretty good, but as you can see here, we get a
Yeah,
little dust on it, and it doesn't look very good. So, but here's a publicity train all blue. It was pretty, but it was I don't know. So blue is like some other things. People either love it or not. I'm kind of mixed about it myself. Here's a couple of SDP 45s coming in on the Western Star coming into Minneapolis, but you can see with a little dirt on it, boy, it doesn't look, it's not very pretty.
Uh-huh.
And I took this in Grand Forks, and this is the Western Star. And Grand Forks, of course, the main line is out here in the wilds in North Dakota. And then they have to pull into town 3 or 4 miles, something like that. And so this is obviously an eastbound train. They come cruising into town pretty fast, and then they stop at the station. And it was a big stop because I think they changed crews, but they also there's the University of North Dakota, and Grand Forks Air Force Base had I don't know, tens of thousands of people. So there were always a lot of people getting on and getting off the train here. Well,
Check out the old Rambler over there.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. Yeah. And there's a Great Northern, about a 55 Chevy pickup, maybe something like that. Yeah. But then after they were done loading, they would back straight out of town, and the conductor would be back there with his little air brake and whistle and everything, but they would go pretty fast. It was straight out of town, and then they would turn and head south. This is two SDP 45s.
Right, beautiful.
At Shelby, Montana. This is off the internet. In the late 60s, you can see the 66 Ford sitting there. And mostly blue train. They were getting a lot of blue stuff. This is probably about 1969. So the blue looked pretty good when it was clean, as we saw it with the beige. The beige dirt didn't do very well with it. But of course, they had the original domes. This is actually the phase 2 domes, because the phase 1 domes Burlington had some, and I think Santa Fe had some with the lower rectangular glass, and the stairway was in the front. The stairway was in the back, and it was bigger. And then the Bud built these super domes, and they were
Great Dome.
Excuse me, the Great Dome. You're absolutely right. Great Dome on the Great Northern, and they were so big they had to have 6 axles, 3-axle.
Oh wow!
Trucks, yeah. For a quote lightweight, they were a big car, probably the biggest probably the biggest individual car. I think the SP had some permanently coupled cars with a truck under the middle, but this is probably the biggest individual car in North America.
When you
And
consider the weight of the glass and all the air conditioning equipment.
yeah, they had to have their own generator. The other cars at this time had pulleys going to the wheel. And that was one of the things reason they needed more horsepower is because they had to pull all these air conditioners and generators and stuff like that on the cars. But this thing was so big that they had to have its own generator. Now inside, this is the view looking forward, and here's the view looking back. And I remember I would go out to Montana. That's how I got interested in trains. I would go out to Montana with my grandfather, who had he was an accountant for the Minneapolis gas company. And during the summer, they weren't very busy because they produced a little bit of gas, but nothing like for the winter, because there weren't pipelines or anything. So they had to manufacture the gas. And then they had those tanks that floated, and they were floating on water, and they'd go up in the summertime and come down in the winter. And so we would go out, and you'd leave Minneapolis, much like the schedule now, about 10 o'clock, and you get out to Havre at noon the next day. And then when we return, we'd get on at noon and head back to Minneapolis. And so I would be out taking pictures, and he'd say, well, we're going to go have dinner. I'm going to go have my whiskey. And he would have one whiskey every afternoon before dinner. And he did that from the time he was 30 until he was 94 when he passed away. So it worked for him. Just one, not two. But anyway, he would wear a suit, and he was always very formal. This is the late 60s. And so anyway, I came walking up, and he's sitting right about here. And there's this whole crowd of people sitting around him. And there were people sitting on the stair, on the stoop, or the step for the stuff. And he's talking about going out to Montana in 1914 on the Oriental Limited.
Oh,
and
wow.
My grandmother grew up in North Chicago, right near North downtown. And they went to Havre, and they got off. And my grandmother would always tell me she couldn't believe the number of saloons and brothels between the train station and the hotel. She said it was still the Wild West. But they stayed in Havre a few days, and they bought a tent and a wagon and some horses and plows and boards and all that stuff. And they headed out 30 miles and built a sod hut. And for 3 summers, he had to farm this land. It was a homestead, and so he farmed it for 3 years. And he planted, and then he would hire harvesters to come in. They were just getting the steam-powered harvest combines at that time, but it was fascinating to hear the stories. And the Mounties, because it was about 10 miles from the border, and the Mounties would chase criminals into the U.S., and so they would stop by and see my grandmother, and it was amazing. But anyway, he had this huge crowd, so it was kind of fun to sit in the Great Dome. But that would happen every time we'd go back. And he loved to tell the stories, and people are going 1914. That was 55, 60 years, 55 years before before we were sitting there. So people were amazed by it.
Uh-huh.
And so here's the diner was of course right behind the Great Dome. She's taking the stuff out of the diner, and here's the air conditioning, and they had a lounge downstairs. So they held a lot of people.